Thank you so much for joining me. To explain, I just had the chance to see The Planets early, the BBC's new documentary. And we are joined by Stephen, Gideon and Robert. And to chat a bit about what you do. So first, can you kind of introduce what your roles are? Because a lot of the people watching understand how YouTube videos are made, particularly within science communication, where largely it's one person does everything. So can you talk a little bit about what your individual roles are?
Do you want to start?
Okay, well, I'm the series director on the series. I directed 2 of the shows and some other stuff across the series. I kind of write the initial scripts with help from the rest of the team and go out on location and shoot with the crew, shoot all the material, and then sort of involved in coming back and kind of editing all that together. Mm-hmm.
I'm Gideon. I'm the series producer on Planets. Across the whole piece, all 5 episodes and all the other versions for different territories, working closely with the directors, working closely with Robert, Lola, the musicians, all the other elements that we have. The post-production house, everything, trying to bring the whole thing together and get to hire loads of really cool creative people and let them hopefully do an amazing job.
Mm-hmm. And I'm Rob. I have a company called Lola Post, and we're responsible for all of the CG and VFX in the series. So working very closely with Gideon and Steve and the other directors and producers. So we get the script and we sort of, with the team, will interpret that and try and bring it to life.
So this is the thing I think I found fascinating about this compared to, say, a natural history TV documentary, which you'll send people out, they'll film the stuff, you come back and you're like, okay, what's the story? You might have an idea beforehand of what it's going to be. But this is so heavily reliant on CG, which is expensive. You don't want to make more of it than you have to. So at what point do you kind of say, okay, do you know exactly what it's going to look like in the finished product before you even start picking up a camera?
I think no. I think that we know exactly what. I think the other thing to mention is that it's not just that it's expensive; it's that it takes time to make. So to render the pictures, and there's a limited capacity there. So I think actually, when we were out on the first shoot, the CG was already being made, and we'd had to commit to sequences and like the kind of space probes and model builds, the assets.
Yeah, we build all the models in advance. So we build the terrain. If we know that they're going to go to a particular location on Mars, we'll have that terrain built and ready, so that when Steve gets back and he starts cutting, he's got some pictures to use. And as you saw from the little clip I showed, we use a lot of storyboards, so we actually draw the story, and we put that into the edit to get an idea of timings beforehand as well. So most of it's in our head.
But was there
these guys have to trust us,
where you're looking at the edit flow and you're like, oh, I really wish we had this one little extra thing. Oh, Rob, can you animate this thing for us?
Constantly.
I think so.
But that's part of the process.
I think there was also times where the opposite happened, where we had so many CGI shots in a row, and when it came to we couldn't afford all of those, so we had to look for other places. And if you watch some of the sequences, you can see there are the shots that have virtually no CGI, that are shot elements, close-ups of water running, that would be very expensive to make in a CG environment, but you could take a slow-mo camera to location and shoot that. So it sort of came and went. We put in more location stuff in some places, like little cutaways, so that we could focus the money on the the kind of big things that we couldn't do. You could never shoot spacecraft landing and that kind of stuff.
And throughout this series, there must have been a lot of trade-offs between scientific accuracy and visual interest, but then also you have got this trade-off between visual effects and CG graphics, which I would have thought any other documentary, maybe it's my biology background, everyone's like, oh, you've got to make it super clear to the audience what's really there and what is an animation, whereas this, you cannot tell when you're watching it.
That's very deliberate, very deliberate. Because we used a lot, we had to generate 25 minutes per episode of CG, which over 5, that's getting into nearly 2.5 hours of stuff.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of tricks. For instance, we'll take a really high-res NASA image and we might wrap that around a sphere to make a planet for certain shots, which is quite a simple thing to do, but looks stunning. So we were finding little tricks. So little lens flares, the probes sometimes are just little white dots. You don't even see the probe. It's not really even a CG model. It's just a little dot. But you can't. You sort of blur where Steve shoot the NASA footage and us is all very mashed together.
And from a visual point of view, that's perfect.
Yeah, so you're never sure when you've come out of a story, I suppose.
From a more factual point of view, how do you then balance that of, what you're looking at is the real thing? Like at one point you put the text up on screen, this is the actual shot that the Curiosity rover took. Like, how do you get across to the audience? How important is it that you get across to the audience what's real and what is visual effects?
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. That is one way that we do it, is that when we label real elements, a lot of the planetary views, for example, like the first time you really meet the planet, where Brian sat down with an iPad going through images, they are genuine images.
Yeah.
I think, when we're 4.5 billion years in the past, we tend to assume that people assume that we didn't film that. So we kind of, I suppose that the grey area becomes when you're in modern day Mars. And that was really a creative decision. There are some amazing people, a lot of them on YouTube, who do some really amazing kind of 3D renders of the real data of Gale Crater. But for TV, it can look a little bit sort of flat, and actually in its own weird way it can look a bit synthetic because the resolution isn't there yet. And we did some tests on that actually early on, and you kind of look, it's the real data, but it's still not quite real because it's a render of the data.
It's rounded off. It can end up looking a bit plastic or a bit kind of unreal.
So it was a creative decision saying that on this particular series, we really wanted to create the emotional feeling of what would it like to be like on Mars with your own eyes as that craft landed.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose
and that was our.
It's never really been up until the last few years. It's never been an issue because the CG's never been that photoreal.
Yeah.
So you always knew it was a
like walking with dinosaurs.
Exactly. You look at
obvious,
it and you go, well, here comes the CG explaining what. But with nowadays we can really blur those lines. So it's been the first time I've really been quite surprised by when you look at it back and you go, oh, hang on, that was ours. You just sort of get into the narrative, you get into the story, you get kind of absorbed.
And one of the big concepts of the series is that you're anthropomorphizing these planets.
Yeah.
They take on their own characters. Whose idea was, who thinks, you know what, I'm going to turn the planets into a family drama?
He's not here, but that's our boss, Andrew, right? So from the get-go, the sale, that was the pitch. So when this went to market, that was the pitch to the commissioners. Because, I think, Stephen, actually, you didn't work on the last... I worked on one as a solar system 10 years ago with Brian. And Andrew and I both worked on that. And then there was another planets show, The Planets, another 10 years prior to that. So the BBC seems to do this every 10 years or so because the science moves on enough that you can really have another go. And so it's partly well we've taken Brian. He has looked at the planets before in a kind of illustrated lecture mode. Sometimes in a road trip kind of mode. Where would you go on Earth? Where are the best places on Earth that resemble the physics that's happening on these distant planets? And so we'd done that. That was the pitch.
We definitely didn't want to make effectively Wonders of the Solar System 2. I think we wanted to make something different, and I think that idea of trying to characterize and tell the story as a kind of drama, that's what we came to. I think
it does feel like a drama, and I mean maybe it's because I'm watching it in the cinema, but it feels like all of the recent like superhero sci-fi films, especially the sound design, and the editing as well feels very cinematic rather than what we're used to seeing on the BBC. Do you see this as an entertainment piece? Like, because you can see science as we want to educate the public, and obviously the two aren't mutually exclusive. But is this the sort of thing where you expect people to sit down and think, oh, I'm just going to be really entertained by this?
I think it's a bit of both, isn't it? I think it is both, because in a sense you want people to sit down and enjoy it, and I think that's what most people want to do at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night when it's going out. But you want to sit down, and you don't want to work hard for something. You want to sit down and be entertained. And I think by being entertained, I think that's how the science information can be put across. So there is loads of content in there, I think. And because you're wrapped up in the story, you take it in as part of that. So I guess it's a sort of, you are being entertained, and I think the pitch is that this is, I guess it is a science program, but I guess it is entertainment, and that, by, you're sitting down and enjoying it, and we sort of sneak the science in by stealth.
Yeah.
And then, if you then want to know, well, how does Mars lose its magnetic field, or in this show, or where is that place on Mars, then there are resources for you to sort of go away and look at it afterwards. And I know from my own point of view that I watch documentaries, and then or even films and straight on YouTube to find, or on Wikipedia to find out who is that person, and did that really happen? Yeah. Did that, and who was that one? And so I think it is.
We're the gateway drug to it's that kind of thing, that this is, if you like this, if we can stir some emotion in you around these worlds, then hopefully that sets you off on that journey, as you say.
And are you aiming at an audience that wouldn't normally sit down and watch
absolutely
BBC documentaries?
Yeah. We want a mass audience to come and enjoy this. I mean, it's interesting with my kids. They're totally brought up on YouTube. Their source is YouTube, and I take them along. We're all slightly geeky, I think, looking around. We were slightly geeky into the space stuff, quite like this stuff. And
you just spent 2 years making a space
2 years.
series,
You have to be fairly
geeky,
comfortable with it. But not everyone is, right? So, I think all of us through this are really trying to, stir emotion, feel something when you get a probe down on a different planet,
and to inspire you to go on and look for that this should inspire you to go and read up about it, or then there is all that to inspire you to find out more about the planets, rather than try and exhaustively tell you everything about Mars.
Yeah, and from a production perspective, what kind of challenges were you up against? Were there any points where you had to really struggle to think of a way that you were going to represent something or film something? Is there a point, the hardest part was, that story? And
well, the water floor was quite a challenge.
I think the key to the Mars story is that the magnetic field dies, and all that action happens in the core of the planet, which is very difficult to visualize in any sense, because it's solid. Or essentially you're just sort of, there's no space in there to put a camera on a thing.
So we didn't,
and we didn't want to do a sort of break out of the kind of cinematic field to have a sort of a diagrammatic, sort of cut through of the Earth, and this is the thing, or Mars. And so that was a challenge, and we solved that by being very lucky and filming Brian in front of the Aurora, which is, I suppose, a visual way of showing. Well, it gives you a visual, something for him to talk about, that he can talk about the magnetic field, and there's sort of the effects of the magnetic field. And it also gives you a way of illustrating Mars's field dying by seeing the death of Mars's own Aurora. Yeah. And so you can impart the information with Brian in front of the Aurora, and it gives you a graphic where you can actually see it without having to be inside the planet. So,
in terms of a challenge as well, the filming of that, right? So we send Steve off to Iceland, and we were having a very sweaty, because you hope, there's so many variables involved there. There's the weather, right? You've got to have clear skies to see it,
and then the space weather
that the thing's going to happen, and then the presenter's time. So we basically had a very sweaty sort of weekend where it's like, do we go? Do we not? We send the whole crew out to the southwest corner, because that's where the weather was going to be.
And then we had to drive all the way up to the north early to try and then basically chasing the cloud cover. and then we just got one incredible night. Well, in fact, we went out. We shot most of Brian's pieces to camera because the skies were clear. There was some aurora in the sky.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, we did all Brian's pieces, the kind of all the shots you see of him, and then we sent him off home back to the hotel, and the crew stayed to get some extra shots of just cutaways of the aurora itself, and then kind of within 15 minutes of him leaving, the skies just lit up, and that kind of what you see in the film it was the most amazing kind of aurora display I think any of us had ever seen. And so we phoned Brian up, and by the time we got through to him, he was already on his way back, and so that's when we shot and you'll see in the film his opening piece to camera in front of the aurora. The sky is just kind of blue and green and purple.
Yeah, it was stunning.
We got that, he came back, got that, and we've got all these other shots, and you think we went from, going, okay, we've got it, feeling like, phew, we've got it. It's not been amazing, but we've got it, to, oh my God.
It's almost sad that there is such this seamless mix of CG and reality, because in that shot, you went to so much effort to get the real thing on screen, and anyone sitting at home could be like, well, they just added it in post.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing there is when we did one of the solar system like 10 years ago, we didn't completely cheat, but you had to do long exposure photographs. The camera technology wasn't sensitive enough at that time to expose for your subject and the aurora. So when we got lucky to do that last time, but you were running maybe, I think it was about 20-second exposures, and then you run that as a time lapse, and you get them doing their lovely thing. And this time around, it's all in camera. I mean, that's
and the cameras see the better than you do.
Should put a caption under it.
Well,
really?
I mean, I was maybe it's because I'm a bit of a camera geek, but I was thinking, like, oh my God, they've got Brian lit. The noise is really quite low, and they've got it. That must be some hell of a DP you've got there to be shooting all that.
What did you shoot that on? Can you remember?
That's a Sony A7S, I think. So it's a stills camera, but it's super sensitive. And I think it can see more in the dark than you can.
Yeah.
So and so I think we were incredibly lucky. But I think you can tell. I think you can. It is, I think it's amazing. It can see that in the dark. But I think you can see the pixelation.
I think you can mostly tell from Brian Cox's excitement. To be honest.
Yeah, and I don't think you couldn't kind of fake that.
Yeah.
No.
And you mentioned before that you're all kind of geeky. Do any of you have science backgrounds, like traditional science backgrounds?
Art school for me.
Art school, hey! I read physics at Durham, and then did a science communication course at Imperial College. A lot of
the classic.
The classic one, it's many moons ago. I think it's probably the third or fourth year through. It was with Andrew, So Andrew and I did that.
I've got a degree in biology and psychology, so not space at all.
Yeah.
Although, I've done so many space things, people seem to think I know about physics, but I just have dinner party knowledge of physics. I sort of feel like I'm
At what point do you get the experts involved? Is it from the
pretty much from the get-go? Yeah. So the way it's structured is that there's a director on every film with an assistant producer who generally are science background as well. Not necessarily physics or space. Actually, we got lucky on this one because a lot of the APs had come off the Sky at Night, so they sort of done quite a bit on that.
Katie's got a degree in planetary science as well, I think.
Tori had as well, yeah. So we got very lucky actually in that they were available and we could.
I think but I think also right from the start, those guys are talking to the expert. So as well as they'll be ringing up some of the guys that you see in the film, so like Ashwin and other kind of experts and people that they know, to sort of try and stand up stories and did this happen or what about this and what was the what's the kind of to work out the timeline. And then also on this series we have 2 consultants from the Open University who are involved at kind of several stages through the scripting process. We send them the scripts, they check it, tell us what's right, what's wrong, what we need to change and how.
And gave us ideas, didn't they?
Stuff, So there's a story about Mercury, this theory that it formed much further out and then got sort of knocked in, or there was possibly a collision that sent it into its sort of strange, very close orbit to the sun, and that came from David Rothery at the Open University. It's his theory. And that's kind of one of the sort of main big CGI sequences in the first episode.
Yeah.
And from your perspective, having to create these, I know you've done a lot of work on non-scientific animation as
We've
well.
done quite a bit of. We were doing, I think, 4 series of how the universe works and things like that. So I've done quite a bit of space and in my time.
Is it helpful or hindering to have these boundaries? Because in a sense, like, you also get like the NASA images that you can use as a base to work off, and I imagine for things like the rovers, you can look at the blueprints and
all the models.
All the models
are genuine.
Yeah, they're genuine models. That's all real.
And the rover as well. NASA JPL have a Curiosity on the ground.
Yes.
Here that they used. To practice maneuvers.
It was all dismantled when you went.
Yeah, largely dismantled. And hasn't got half the bit.
We had plans to use lots of real rover
Yeah.
shot on the ground with a green screen and then combining it, but it just wasn't up to it, so we did it all in CG at the end. But the terrain, there's a lot of very, very good. Mars is a bit of an odd one, actually, because it is so well mapped.
Yes.
And we found that we got a lot more wacky the further out we get into the universe with some of the gas giants.
Was that fun coming up with what you think it is?
Well, for us, it's really good because we can interpret somebody describes a process or something that, and it's pretty, the biggest thunderstorm in the universe or the biggest, best, this, that, and the other. And then we can go off, we interpret that and chuck it back to these guys who then show the open, would it be like that? And they're kind of, I mean, I used to have these long conversations in the pub with a guy called Nigel Hembest, who's an astronomer and writer. And he always told me that as long as if he was the expert on the show, as long as he could go to the pub with his scientific friends and not look foolish, as long as they said, yeah, actually that was pretty cool. And we were sending them stuff, and they were really very responsive to it, weren't they? They were very kind of like, well, it could be like that, but it's a good representation.
It must be so nice for them as well to see a visualization of it.
That isn't very graphic or very kind of simple.
Because and were there any points where they got new ideas about their theories based on the visualizations of it?
I wouldn't go that far. No, I think we may have. What is interesting is that people can't help but if you've done 10 years worked on a theory and you're working towards trying to really land that theory, you may not be as widely read about the rival theories as we become, because we search wide to try and solve our story issues. So quite often we were finding stuff that some of the people we were talking to hadn't heard of or weren't quite as familiar with. The Mercury story Steve talked about earlier is interesting because it's 4.5 billion years ago, based on little tiny bits of evidence that they're trying to solve, and then we cast this very visual, visceral kind of example of what this might have been like. But we handle that very carefully to say that this is just a theory. It's a neat theory because it explains a couple of the mysteries about the volatiles on the surface of Mercury and why it's got such a large core. You have to explain why. These are big questions, and this is a very neat theory that explains all of that, but we don't really know. But we're in the game of, that's really cool, 2 planets colliding. But there's a bit of drama, so there's a nodal point in our story where we can actually get some imagery where planets are doing something and there's a crisis.
That is one of those moments where you could get on your phone and look it up and go, oh, that did happen, or it didn't, or but there's just one of X, Y, and Z different theories, and that you concede that in the show, and then you can go away and learn more about it.
But we were careful, I think, just to add that we were careful about consensus as well. We weren't picking the most out there theory just to make the story work. And that particular one, I remember phoning David up while he was at a conference with all his peers, and he just I was saying, are you sure, is this consensus? And he said, oh, hang on a minute, And you just put the phone down and it's a show of hands. Who thinks that who thinks that this is the leading theory at the moment? And then any other theories?
Up,
and he said, yeah, we think it's, there's a pretty good feeling of consensus in the room. And you think, well, that's great,
Well, it's so important from a scientist's perspective. It is so important that they can work with the media and feel that still their view is being put across correctly and in an credible way.
Yeah.
And at the same time, they get to show off, oh, look, this thing that I was talking about, now you can see it, which must be great for them.
I mean, there is that tension that when you realise it like this, that it does feel a bit like this is how it is. So again, we just try to, without undercutting it all, it's how do you tread that line of just saying, this right now is a pretty good stab of what we think the story of the planets is. 10 years' time, I'm sure it'll be different. I'm sure we'll have learnt more and we'll know more, and some of that will have changed, 100%. But it's a good stab for now, really good.
Yeah. And what moment for each of you are you proudest of? It might have been in the production or in the finished product. Putting you on the spot here. Coming to you first.
Difficult to say. I think I've said in the past. I think there are things where. So we did in the Mars film. There's a sequence of the late heavy bombardment, which I think kind of, for me, sort of epitomizes sort of everything that we wanted to achieve. It's a moment in the story of the planet's lives, if you like. It involves CGI. It's got pure CGI. There's location plates that we filmed in Iceland combined with CGI, and it's got all the things that we hoped to have in it. It's got the music, the sound effects, the CGI, and kind of shot material all sort of coming together into this kind of spectacular moment, how many billion years ago. And I think that sort of, I think, epitomizes for me what we hope to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it's that there are moments, I hope, that will move the audience. That there are, every now and again, there's either excitement or a bit of pathos that pops up where you just go, oh, poor old Mars, or beautiful Saturn, wow. There were definite moments. That was coming into it, that was the primary thing. Like we know the science is amazing and we can report that and share that, but to then take you on a trip where you feel something, like all the best cinema, where you just go, oh my god, I'm there.
Yes, if you could have a connection with those places, or
that's, and I think, fingers crossed, we'll find out. Hopefully. Come on Twitter, let us know how you're feeling as you watch it go out.
I'm sure people will let you know how they feel.
I mean, there's several scenes throughout the whole series that they've really come out sort of better than I thought they would, in a way. But I think it's just the consistency across the whole series. Quite often with these sorts of shows, you can see where you put the money and where you didn't have the money, and some episodes suffer a bit and others are slightly over. But I think this, from what I've seen 2 projected and 3 on my computer, it's really consistent. I mean, all the shows are really strong, all the stories are good, and the graphics, I think, are really, I love the way they mesh into the story. They've been really sympathetic, everybody, about not messing with the CG too much and just kind of getting it to fit as part of the narrative, rather than going, here it is, cut to CG. So I think it's really nice. A lot of invisible stuff that people won't spot. So I think it's going to be good.
And one final question, if I have time. Yes, I'm getting a nod, so I'm going for it anyway. Because you are behind the scenes, you often don't get to talk to people that watch it directly. Is there one thing that you wish the audience knew about planets and the production, that it's like, now's your chance, you can actually tell people?
Ooh. You mean about our production?
Yeah.
Not the planets themselves.
Not about the planets themselves.
Okay.
I am sure many astronomers will tell people about the planets themselves, but from your perspective, is there something like, people won't, when they sit at home, they won't realise what went into that, or our viewpoint on this?
I don't know. I think it's kind of like it's I guess the time. I don't think people. I don't know. I don't know that people always seem surprised that I'm still working on the planets and I've been on it for 2 years. And in
to me, 2 years does not sound like a long time for a documentary.
Okay.
For a big one like this.
Yeah, I suppose that's what I think, that there is an enormous amount of kind of work that goes into it, and that this is a sort of 2-year kind of labour of love from kind of a whole team of people behind the scenes that, so I think there is all that, and it's not just like, I guess that I think that's the thing for me.
I mean, we should shout out the other directors as well. I mean, Steve led the charge. He made the first episode, so he faced the scary blank piece of paper, and having to bring the first show in, and and has done an amazing job. And then that sort of inspired everybody else, and got Rob's juices going, and and it all started moving forward. We were lucky to have two other really great directors, Martin Johnson, who made the opening episode about Mercury, Venus, Earth, and a little hint of Mars in that one. But that was the other genius thing about the whole series, is that let's make a series about the planets in 8 planets, 5 episodes. So you kind of go, how's that going to work? Together. So the first one, there's a couple of episodes that have a number of characters. So Martin made actually both of them multiples. Martin made, Steve made Mars and Jupiter. We're running them in kind of sequential order outwards. And then Nick Stacey came on to make his love letter to Saturn, as I call it. It's probably one of the most romantic films. There's just such a romance about that particular episode. So it's really it's just been that sort of joyous thing of having a very clear thing, which is the anthropomorphisation. I can't even say the word, but you were talking about earlier that let's tell the story. If Disney or Pixar were making the story of the planets, how would they approach it? And playing with that. And even though at one stage I think I even wrote sort of fairy tales. If you told the story of Mars as a fairy tale with these two, a jealous sister, Earth looking over, just to really, really simplify the story down, just to make sure we were hitting those story beats. It doesn't really come across as a fairy tale now, but that's the.
But the extremes of emotion and the extremes in the plot feels quite like
simplifying, so that then when it comes out, you hope that those thoughts that we talked about, and
I suppose that's the thing, isn't it? Like you can only take the
you can't say
so far, in the sense that that planets don't have hopes and dreams, and they aren't jealous, but they can be alive or dead, or they can be, like in the Jupiter episode, Jupiter is immensely powerful and it can use its power for good or bad, and you can be sort of, and hopefully that feels enough to relate to without it sort of feeling kind
cheesy,
of ridiculous.
Of
course it doesn't mean to do that, or it doesn't, like it's not unhappy or like jealous.
But we were in that world. I think that's the thing to share, is that when we were devising and writing and thinking about this, we gendered all the planets, and then all the scientists were like, you can't gender planets. And it's like, but for us it was useful, and then as we've gone through, that's been pared back, as Steve said. But there are little hints. Well, the two sisters,
And Rob, what's something you want the audience to know?
The space doesn't really look like that. Space is very empty when you get up there, and that's what we've always struggled with. Is a lot of the science stuff you get in a book or you see on TV will clump all the planets in a row very close together, and it all looks very exciting. And then when you're actually there, so we're trying to make it look realistic and photographic and take people there for real. But if you were there for real, it's black. There's nothing there at all for miles, and then you might see another little speck somewhere over there. And I always got quite shocked at things like galaxies colliding, thinking, my God, that must be really... And you talk to the scientists, they go, you wouldn't even notice. Everything's so far apart. So it's trying to get that idea. And we decided really early on, and these guys bought it, I was so pleased. We took all the stars out. You might not have noticed, but there's no stars in anything.
Rob became the star police.
I was the star police. It was like, you can take that off. And
I love it. You're making a massive astronomy series, and there aren't any stars allowed.
It was limiting the palette, so we decided that it's about these jewels that hang on black. It just looks visually very beautiful. And as soon as you start putting stars, and then it's nebula clouds and the Milky Way and everything, it gets cluttered, looks a bit sci-fi and false. So, and it also helped us go from the NASA footage, a lot of which has no stars because you're exposing for the planet itself, which meant that we could stitch the stories together and the elements together much more clearly. But there's some scenes. There's one in there where I think is it the Marvin probe? It's one of the MRO flies past, and the camera's moving, and it's on black, and it drives our animators mad because if you've got stars in there, you can tell where things are. But it's a really nice limitation to put on everything. Is you have to keep the camera believable, and you've only got black and a planet, and you've got to engage the audience with that. And I think it's simplicity in the storytelling. It gets over that whole problem of space being empty. You can make it look beautiful and empty or cluttered, with stars.
And that was all in Rob's original pitch. When you're actually pitching for the job, it was looking at
suicidal pitch.
It's looking at like what the astronauts actually, when you photograph Earth, with the camera,
it's all those Gemini
and
Apollo missions.
You're exposed to the planet, and the stars have gone, and so
it's like you don't see stars on Earth in the daytime.
Yeah.
So why would you expect to see them in the daytime?
But there is an Easter egg in the last film because when in the last film we go with New Horizons all the way out, and right at the end, we've graded subtly across the series as you get further out that it's getting slightly darker. And by the end,
black on black.
We're almost out there, and then the stars come up. So there is that that's one little thing that we plotted all the way through the series.
That was the idea. They could have stars in the last shot.
So watch out for the stars.
It's quite pretty, but it was very deliberate. It's and I think that's what I really like about the series is it looks. If you can't cut any old documentary space shows into this without it jarring.
Yeah.
Because it does look very different.
Yeah, I mean, even just the concept is very different to any documentary I've seen on TV before. I think it's great. Thank you so much for chatting. It's been fascinating. And I hope you all enjoyed that.